Hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is in our Great Engine Game series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we are continuing to celebrate Leela's victory in the TCEC Swiss 7 in maybe a slightly more traditional manner with one of its victories. And this is a fine game against Ethereal. So this is for the Leela fans, also a little bit for the Budapest Gambit fans because this game features that opening as well. Let's have a look how it starts. So d4, knight f6, c4, e5, d takes c5, knight g4, and now the book move was bishop f4. This is the old move, the old main line really. Bishop protects the pawn on e5. You get ready to play e3 in response to bishop c5, combining against f2, and the knight will come to f3 to protect the pawn on e5. So yeah, it's not the engine's main choice nowadays, although it was Obsidian's choice when you leave Obsidian to analyze for a very long time. But yeah, I mean, we saw in a whole video series that this plan, Alekin's plan, is the favourite of the engine. It's actually just trying to fight to not allow the black minor pieces to remain active. So the knight gets chased away from e5. When the bishop comes to c5, white chases the bishop away with knight c3 to a4. I mean, do take a look at that video series on the Budapest Gambit if you haven't seen it already. There was also an extra little bonus, a Brucey bonus, as we say in England, that this system, knight c3, knight takes c5, knight f3, which is virtually never played, but actually seems fairly strong as well. Again, you know, fighting against this knight on e5 here in a slightly different way. And the little tactical point that knight takes c4 is met by queen d5, knight b6, queen e5 check. And black doesn't actually have a way to hold on to its pawn because, you know, bishop e7 loses g7 and queen e7 loses c7. So, you know, white just ends up with a nice advantage there. Well worth looking at that. Do take a look at that video if you're interested. After bishop f4, the book move is not the best move, which is knight c6. The book move is g5. And yeah, this has been played quite a lot at the TCEC. It's quite a popular one. It's a good way really of, you know, by move 4, giving white actually a nice advantage. Well, plenty of weaknesses for black, you know, that move g5. It gains a tempo also for development of the bishop on the long diagonal. But actually it turns out to be, you know, more of a weakness than any, you know, big acceleration in black's development, because after all, you know, black's already played the move e5, so, you know, the black bishop's already got a great set of squares to develop to. So playing g5 to give it also access to g7 doesn't really feel like efficient development really. And well, you know, as we always see in Basman systems, you know, this g5 move, yeah, you know, if white survives the initial onslaught, it's always going to be a bit of a weakness. Now, yeah, I mean, the engines have gone through various phases of what they thought was best. I mean, bishop d2 is one move trying to come round to c3, but I think the engines have settled on bishop g3 is the best move, and it's something like 1.+1 basically for Torch and Stockfish, so you can see how strong that is. So black plays knight c6. I mean, the one thing is that black is guaranteed to get back this pawn reasonably quickly. I mean, you could attack it with an awful lot if you need to. So white doesn't try and keep that pawn. White just goes straight for the weakness of the g pawn with h4. Black plays knight takes e5, and now the nice move knight c3. What is white's idea here? Well, I mean, the knight the pawn on c4 rather is not really hanging. You play e4 and black's in quite a lot of trouble here. You know, if you go knight e5, for example, most natural. There's quite a few lines, but let's just show you this one. H takes g5, queen g5. We hit the queen with rook h5. We come into to d5, hitting c7, and after bishop d6, we go rook c1. Hitting the pawn on c7, stopping that knight from moving away. And yeah, you know, with all the pressure on the black position, and you know, more to come basically, you know, black's really struggling to survive here. You know, I mean, the engines are giving it you know, +3 or something like that already, so you know, you're not going to survive this in an engine game in any case. So in order to keep things just a little bit closed, black plays the move g4 here. White plays e3 and black plays d6 here. And yeah, I mean, time just to really look at, what is the position. I mean, black's got out of the opening alive there. There's nothing terrible happening for black at this very moment. But there are a few things that are a little bit awkward. I mean, first of all, this g-pawn has advanced quite far. So it means that castling kingside, feels a little bit airy for black. Another thing that's maybe not quite so obvious, but it's a sort of an English structure with a pawn on c4 against a black pawn on d6. And yeah, white's got a very nice outpost on d5 because this black knight is on c6, so black doesn't have the c7, c6 to drive away the knight. And of course from d5, this knight's attacking kind of unpleasant squares here on f6, for example. But I think that the very most important thing here is this beautiful square f4 for white. I mean, this square on f4 is really lovely. If you can just imagine a knight there, it can come into this d5 outpost. It can come onto h5 to attack the f6 square, attack a bishop on g7, going potentially there. If black plays the move h5, then the knight's attacking the pawn and the rook will be forced to defend it forever. If you don't go h5, then yeah, there's always other possibilities somehow. And when you've got squares like f4 where the black g-pawn's advanced to g4 already, so you can never chase it away with a pawn. You can't chase it away with g5. I called those in Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, I called those entrenched squares. They're squares that you have the feeling you will never ever shake the white pieces from that square. And what you tend to find is that those pieces, they tend to stop the opponent from really creating meaningful counterplay because you're so solid on your squares. The black will never be able to destabilize you, and that's kind of the the long-term problem that black has. White's so solid on its squares, black's really going to have problems creating anything that's going to worry white. And well, the engines kind of hate those sort of situations where you're sort of looking at the position and saying, yeah, but what's my long-term activity? Well, you're going to see how it turns out because this is a situation that's kind of made for Leela's style, and Leela plays it quite beautifully. Although it must be said also, Stockfish and Torch, they're also playing it quite beautifully in my engine games. So h5 from Leela, just nibbling away. I mean, you could say, oh, black should have stopped that with h5, or white should have played h5 here, in order to stop that. I mean, basically, it's one of those things where where the engines say, oh, okay, I'll play h5 now. But if black plays h5, then the engines aren't particularly worried either. It's one of those things actually where humans often spend a lot of time agonizing, should I not? And then the engines look at it and say, yeah, but you've got a horrible position anyway, so it doesn't really matter, So black plays d6 and white plays h5 there. And what's Leela trying to do there? Well, I mean, Leela's maybe going to try and nibble a little bit of space there. It also gives the possibility of playing something like bishop h4. So a few extra little things possible there. Actually, Torch was playing something quite interesting. It also played h5, but it's a bit like Dragon in this respect, that it's often choosing between one or two different moves. When Stockfish tends to find a line, you just see the same game being played again and again and again all the time. But with Torch, just like Dragon, you often see that it's got a couple of possibilities that it just seems to like equally. And yeah, this pawn sacrifice was quite interesting and being played by Torch. Bishop d7, knight d5, bishop e7, rook c1. Not 100% convinced that it's as good as the calm h5. But again, I like analyzing with engines that do this because it's just giving you extra possibilities. I mean, it might be that the line that Stockfish prefers, of course, is going to be great, but you just think, oh, is it going to be too complicated? Whereas, maybe Torch comes up with something different, or the other way around. And you think, oh, a little bit quiet, what Stockfish is doing. Say, oh, Torch is sacking a pawn. I like that, So it's always very nice for analysing with an engine like that. I mean, I enjoyed analysing with Dragon from that point of view, and Torch is exactly the same. So thank you, Andrew Grant, for letting me use it. I'm using it all the time actually, and really enjoying it. So h5 played, and bishop f5 now from Ethereal. Again, it's one of those toss-up decisions. Black could go h6. But yeah, you'll get stuff like bishop f4 attacking a pawn in perpetuity. So Ethereal just takes the view. Okay, I'll leave the pawn on h7. It's white is going to be able to play h6 and gain some more space, but okay, at least my pawn will not be as vulnerable. And if white goes h6, I get the g6 square for my pieces. So knight d5 played by Leela, using that outpost, can't be driven away with a pawn on c6. It's going to take black a little bit of effort to do that. Bishop e7, yeah, Ethereal doesn't want to run into h6 there, or bishop h4 and h6. So plays the bishop to e7, and now queen b3 from Leela. What's the idea of queen b3? The idea of queen b3 is simply to put some pressure on the b7 pawn, without really necessarily intending to take it on the next move. It's just saying, I'm looking at it. You never know. One day I might take it. Probably won't be this next move. Maybe not the move after, but it might be one of the next moves. For humans, this is really horrible, actually, because for engines, of course, they just calculated every move. But for humans, it's what I call cognitive load. A bit fancy to say that, but it's really just the load every move is just bigger because there's just some random threat in there that you've got to take seriously, even if you don't think it's right now. But it often happens there that you suddenly play a move and then all of a sudden you say, oh my goodness, he can take it now, can't he? That sort of thing. So very unpleasant move from a human context. a5 from Ethereal, and now just a very solid rook d1. Yeah, I mean, queen takes b7. Black's just getting counterplay with rook b8 takes b2. I mean, even if it costs you a pawn, you don't care, right? I mean, you want to get something to shake up the position. But Leela doesn't allow this. It's a very solid move, rook d1. Supporting the knight on d5. I think Nimzovich would call that overprotecting. It's a nice concept, this overprotection. It's a little bit weird, but the idea is basically that you've got a strong piece in your position, and then when you bring your own pieces into contact with it, they gain in strength. They sort of increase their strength by being associated with something powerful, and it's a little bit weird, but it's not so stupid, and you do find that it often works. I mean, don't just implement Nimzovich's ideas just like that, but some of them are, have got some real value at times. And this is basically what's happening there. You could imagine that the knight now is going to come into e2 f4, for example, and again overprotecting this knight on d5, you can say. So a4. And now queen c3. I mean, I like Leela's play in this game because, what you see is that Leela's just, consolidating it. Leela knows it's got that f4 square. Leela knows that it's super solid. So it just sort of puts its pieces very solidly. And any nudges that Ethereal gives to try and knock it away, it just seems to absorb them just with little moves to the side. And then, when Ethereal says, oh, well, okay, I've got the queen away from that square at least, then does something else, and then Leela moves it back somehow. It's really very, very nice indeed. So bishop f6 played by Ethereal, knight takes f6, queen f6. So yeah, white's exchange off the knight, but for a dark squared bishop, white's got the two bishops, and of course there's some very sensitive dark squares in black's position. So that's a pretty good thing. And of course, it's not the only knight that can go to d5. This other one has got a very easy, clear path towards it. So, off we go. And, well, this pawn h5 is performing a nice function of stopping black from ever going, knight g6 if ever black wanted to stop the knight on f4. Of course, queen is on f6 is hanging right now, so we can't do much about that. Knight d7, played by Ethereal. Queen a3. I mean, Leela probably wouldn't particularly mind exchanging off queens at some stage. I mean, the queen's the defender of the dark squares, right? So that's not going to be bad, but there's no need to rush at all. The queen just sidesteps to a3, keeps control of the b4 square there. Don't want any knight coming in there. eyes the a4 pawn, and yeah, we're getting ready to move this knight into f4 to d5. So castles, knight f4, and then bishop e6. So bishop e6 from Ethereal, covering the d5 square. That's just basically it. And yeah, trying to keep the knights active. I mean, if you're looking at what can be active, this bishop, light square bishop, doesn't have a great deal to do. So seems the better piece to exchange off for the knight. These knights might get a little bit more activity. Now, a very nice Leela move, basically. It's just, you know, you're sort of thinking, okay, you know, I've done something. What am I going to do? So Leela just starts making some extra little gains, nibbling away at territory. h6. Just put this pawn forward, get some dark squares, you know, frees up h5, even h5 for the rook, you know, could be quite nice. And just ask black what you're going to do. And Leela's just saying, I'm solid, you know, I'm thoroughly entrenched. You can't shake me. So I can just start nibbling away and making some little gains. So Ethereal played queen e7, just, yeah, retreating there. Bishop e2 from Leela, knight ce5. Hitting the pawn on c4, just, you know, getting the knight active there. You might be able to play c6 at some stage, stop knight d5, and queen c3. I like this move very much. You know, I mean, the queen was chased away from c3, well, chased away from b3 by a5, a4, so it moved to c3. Then black played queen f6. Leela didn't want to move the queen, so played the queen to a3. But now the situation has changed. You know, Ethereal is shuffling its pieces around. So Leela moves the queen back to c3, and we're coming and we're eyeing g7 now. It's I mean, that flexibility is really, really good, and it's not as easy as you think for human players, because or certainly, you know, I always found that I got very attached to the positions on which my pieces were, and I tended to try and strike. I tended to find, you know, the setup, and then I tried to strike from there somehow. But, you know, sometimes you say, oh, you know, you could have spent a few moves getting closer again, and then try and strike, and that's what Leela does so beautifully. It's really, you know, it's part of it is some sort of appreciation for the rhythm of the game. You know, when you've got time just to make some nice strengthening moves, and when you have to strike. You know, and yeah, I mean, you know, well, the engines in general there, but Leela in particular, I think, you know, really strong at finding that gorgeous mix all the time of strengthening moves and then you know, striking moves. You know, it's. Yeah, I can learn a lot from it. So f6 now from Ethereal, just you know, trying to cover the g7 square, block that diagonal. But yeah, it's an extra little weakness of the light squares now, and obviously this knight's doing a nice job here of coming there. And actually Leela plays knight d5 next, and yeah, I mean, quite striking really that Leela does it precisely at this moment, because now after bishop d5, c takes d5, we'll definitely be looking at a weak square on e6, and this bishop is thinking about getting there in the future. You know, and Leela doesn't do it when the pawn's on f7, because there'll still be some coverage of e6. But as soon as it happens, knight d5, you know, it's little details like this. And now Leela takes the opportunity to play the move f3. And yeah, I mean, this is obviously, you know, one of those drawbacks to moving a pawn like the g pawn so early in the opening. You know, white can sort of arrange its pieces so that you can use it as a target to open lines. And I mean, if you just think what you would need to do normally if this g pawn was on g7 or g6 to open up the g file, you know, so much you'd need to do. And here, because it's nice and close to you, yeah, you can just attack it very easily. Just one move of the f pawn and you're already threatening stuff. Yeah, I mean, drawing the opponent's pieces towards you is often a very efficient way of actually attacking them. So yeah, Ethereal got a little bit nervous. I mean, even f4 might be coming in here, f4 and then e4 afterwards. So Ethereal decided it had to take that pawn, takes, and then put the king on h8, just getting out of the way of the g file, and e4. So what has white gained by this? Well, we've got an open g file, and in principle that's going to be, you know, reasonably nice for the for white, because with this pawn on h6 you've got a lovely square on g7. I mean, another little point is that the king's moved to h8, so it's now caught fully by the h pawn. So there's going to be back rank threats later. Yeah, I mean, white's got some nice attacks on the dark squares here. Bishop on h4, and on top of that, this knight on e5 now is no longer stable. You've got rid of the g pawn, so the break on white playing f4 to chase away the knight on e5 is gone. When the knight on e5 is gone, Leela's queen on c3 will start feeling very interested again in the long diagonal. It's I have actually experienced this sort of thing in my games against engines in general, also Leela, of course. You see it often in my games against crazy Leela, actually, that I'm doing fine, but I just feel like I'm losing losing little bits of my body as the game goes on, basically, and just like Monty Python, and by the end you've got nothing. You haven't done anything horribly wrong, but just you end up with absolutely no position left. And yeah, this is what happens to Ethereal here. So Ethereal has to take a decision. I mean, this knight is really strong on d5, so gets rid of it, giving white the two bishops, of course. Queen e7, rook g1, and now knight c5 from Ethereal. Yeah, I mean, you've got your knights on decent positions there. You've got, yeah, I mean, f4 is a worry, of course, but you are attacking the pawn on e4 there. So, I mean, there's possibilities there, maybe. Leela plays bishop f4, rook g8, and now something really impressive, and it's one of those things that 20 years ago or something, or maybe even just 10 years ago, the engines would struggle. Yeah, even 5 years ago now, a little bit longer than that. The engines would not have any clue about this concept. But now, you're seeing Division 1, Division 2 engines, thoroughly at one with this sort of concept. And what I'm talking about is this move King D2. There's stuff happening on the king side, so the engines just say, okay, well, I'm going to put my king on the queen side, and that just gives me more freedom to play on the king side. I mean, in human terms, that's the Petrosian king maneuver. There's a number of very fine games where Petrosian took all the time in the world. First of all, before doing a pawn storm on the king side, he first of all moved his king from g1 over to a1, and then afterwards he moved his king side pawns forward. And this was really high level strategy, and you sort of feel, well, it's very long term, right? I mean, surely engines will struggle to understand that, but engines like Leela just doing it kind of automatically here. Okay, let's just put our king over on c2. And I mean, there's lots of games, Stockfish against Torch, Torch against Stockfish, where they're all doing this first of all. Here we are, and now that we're beautifully safe, as safe as can be, now we're going to start looking at doing other stuff. Yeah, it's very impressive, simply. So Ethereal decides to swap off the rooks. It means not much counterplay then for Ethereal. It means the white king is completely safe. But okay, yeah, I mean, you don't really want to let the white rook start doubling up on the g file and invading on g7. So rook g6, very typical idea from black here, good defensive idea. The idea is you find a spot on the open file that's protected by a pawn, so that if white tries to exchange off rooks, you can improve your pawn structure. Very, very typical. So how is Leela going to break through? Well, Leela starts looking at the other side. So again, it's this lovely whole board play. So black's kind of barricaded the G file. But now, yeah, the exchange of rooks has a downside that Leela's queen can now invade on the queen side. And well, I mean, this feature that we said before, that the kings had to go to the corner because the G file got opened, and thus is being thoroughly restricted by the pawn on h6 and its own pawn on h7. It means that back rank mate threats are now dangerous. And of course, we're threatening this pawn as well. So Ethereal, well, has to counterattack, but it's a counterattack just to that ends up agreeing to the exchange of queens. And now we've got to have a look at this position. What is this position like? Well, does it look that bad for black? Well, you might think, oh, I've got this pawn on h7. My king can come around and attack it. I could even attack it with a knight. Could this not be so bad for me? But the problem is, of course, that white's got the two bishops against two knights, and well, if black's going after the h pawn, then I'm going to be able to go after the queen side. And of course, one bishop against a knight, that's perfect in a battle with stuff on both sides. Well, just think two bishops against two knights, that's going to be even better. And basically, yeah, Leela's just having a look at this pawn and thinking, well, I've got this target on the queen side. I'm going to win that one, and then I'm going to just create a passed pawn and push it, and the black knights aren't going to be able to do anything with it at all. And yeah, the engines are just saying this is completely winning for white, no chance whatsoever. But the winning technique is very nice. So the king first of all comes after there, and the engines just say there's no hope. There's no hope of trying to do a race. This pawn against this pawn, because obviously when the white king comes to b4, you're even threatening bishop c5 already, followed by king a4. So black comes over to the queen side there, king b4, and just actually ends up giving up the pawn there. I mean, I was vaguely wondering about playing b6 here, takes, king a4, king e7, something like that. But yeah, the engines again are just not very happy. I mean, white's got all sorts of ways of increasing the position, invading through there. It just I mean, this pawn on h7 is also a weakness as well, simply. Yeah, so it just gets very, very difficult for black to survive here. So Ethereal just played knight cd7, gave away that pawn on a4, and now f5. And what Ethereal's trying to do here is trying to break open the center and start attacking it, start nibbling away at that center, basically, and give black, if you can win the e4 pawn, then the d5 pawn might be weak. He might be able to distract white from what he's doing. But yeah, it's quite tough to realize. So bishop e3, knight f6, and actually this is quite amazing. Actually, Leela just doesn't bother with the central pawn, just starts pushing the queen side. So a4 takes, and bishop f3, nice and solid, and a5. And yeah, how is black going to do this? The problem is that white's got so many ways of doing it, right? I mean, you can go play b4, even move the king back, and then just try and push the a pawn like that. That's the one that I was really expecting. But I mean, if the knight moves away from f6, then you can play bishop g4 round to c8 and attack this one. I mean, you could also just look at playing bishop b6 to a7 to b8 and attack this pawn, and give away this pawn, but try and win this one back. So many ways of playing here, whereas and black just needs so many moves to win the pawn, and then the pawn's still a very, very long way from queening with two bishops to stop it. It's just yeah, black's chances are not good. But the funny thing was that I mean, I was quite shocked by what Leela did in this position, because I was really just thinking retreat the king, create a passed a pawn, but Leela just played a6 here and just went for let's just get the pieces nice and active, which really, really shocked me. I mean, the idea basically is that Leela thinks that it's going to get the king to b7. You just can't stop that. And then you're just going to come across, win this pawn and then push the b pawn. But it really felt to me like, wow, I hadn't expected that one at all. King a7, just to stop the king getting to b7 there. And the idea is when this moves, we're just going to check the king and just get out. So yeah, if you go knight g8, we go check, we go bishop e6, and at king e7 we go king b8. If you go knight h6, for example, if you go knight takes h6, I just go king b7, and yeah, those knights are protecting each other, they can't move, and the king's tied to the c7 pawn. It's just it's beautiful. Really beautiful somehow. So king d7 played, bishop g2, Leela just playing with its food, just looking looking to get to the h3 c8 diagonal. It's covered by the knight as far as g4, but you can't do much more when you get there. So king d8, b5, knight d7, bishop h3, pawn on d5 is no longer attacked, so Leela takes the opportunity to move the bishop there. King e8 and bishop e6, knight d8, bishop f5. Just these little moves somehow. You just force the knight back to a slightly more passive square, and now you're attacking the pawn on h7. And You know, it was one of those things we noted in Game Changer, and it was also there in Silicon Road, that, you know, advancing the pawn to h6, it's not an attack thing. It can, you know, in the middle game, it can, you know, lead to a mate on g7, or with the black king on the back rank, of course, it can contribute towards a back rank mate. But it's also incredibly powerful in the endgame. You know, that you're pinning down an opponent's pawn on h7, and if you win that one, this pawn's only 2 moves away from queening. You spent some of your middle game time giving yourself a massive advantage in the endgame. So knight f6 played, bishop d4, tiny little creeping moves with the bishop, just constantly increasing the scope. Knight to g8, and king to b8 now, and suddenly, out of nowhere, as if by magic, this pawn on c7 can no longer be defended. Knight takes h6, and then the funny thing is, you know, Leela doesn't play bishop h7. That would give white some possibility maybe to defend the pawn. Just bishop h3. You know, just we don't care about the pawn. That's another thing that we noted in Game Changer, and also especially in Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, that, you know, often this h pawn is kind of, it's important but not important. It's, you know, it's used as a constant thorn in black side, but often Leela just decides to give it away and just say, okay, no longer need it. It's done all it needs to do, and that's really hard to get your head around that as a human player. But of course, yeah, the h pawn is gone, but the c7 pawn is gone, and that just means pass b pawn, and that's curtains for black. So king e7 here, knight f7, b6, knight g5, and then all that the engines are going to try and do now is to somehow push this knight away from d8 so you can play b7. I mean, you could win a pawn already, end the game, but yeah, the engines are pretty maximalistic, really. So, you know, they're just going to go for it. Bishop e3, just heading for there. h6 played, bishop h6. It's time for giveaway chess, bishop e8. The bishop has gone, knight b5, king c6. The pawn's gone, knight f5, and Ethereal resigned at the same time. King c7 is going to be played, and then b7 to b8, and that is going to be it. So there we are, an absolutely brilliant game, you know, from Leela. You know, Ethereal did actually very little wrong. I mean, in principle, the seeds of disaster were sown in the with the opening move, really. Yeah, I mean, it's so far that you start to think, wow, you know, I mean, is black kind of lost almost, you know, after that that move 4g5. Yeah, you know, I think it's a very important chess thing, really, that, you know, this ability to have entrenched squares where you can't possibly be pushed away from by an opponent's pawn, it really does contribute so much solidity to your position and can really just drain the life away from the opponent's position. And that's what you saw with Leela. You know, at some stages, you know, there was, you know, very little going on, really, just you know, very consolidating some little pressure points on the opponent's position, and then just consolidating. You're knocked away, you just move to the side. Don't worry about it. Calmly transfer your pieces. There's something you don't like, just move to the side, and then, you know, you'll come back later. Grab little stuff, and then you come back later afterwards. You know, it's really lovely slow rhythm, but then at some stage, you know, this acceleration, and again, a very important point there, you know, that that when your opponent's pieces are close to you, when your opponent's pawns in particular are close to you, that can really accelerate your play, because you have to make so much less effort to open lines. And the whole thing was just basically, you know, sawing away at the branches on which Ethereal was sitting, really, and gradually weakening everything, and then it just all breaks. You know, white ends up with 2 bishops against 2 knights, and an endgame scenario where there's going to be play on both sides. You know, and well, that's just a scenario that Ethereal can't cope with, no engine can cope with. So there we are, really lovely game from Leela. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope Mr. Beads has enjoyed that. Maybe the game against Eki Satan was a bit of a shock. I think I've got another game from Leela that we're going to have a look at, just from the Swiss 7. And really played very, very well there. And, well, also looking forward to the TCEC Cup. So there we are. If you enjoyed the video, why not give a like, subscribe to the channel, take a look at my new books. And otherwise, thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you at the next video. Thanks for watching.